Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join Monster's webinar on Black leaders in diversity hiring. We are honored to host today's conversation, something that received renewed focus and attention in 2020 and has also been an ongoing issue for a number of years. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. Feel free to continue to submit questions throughout our discussion. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible over the next 60 minutes. There will be no formal presentation in order to keep this nice and lively and dynamic. And let's start off with, I'm Shawne Robinson, Senior Director of Product Management at Monster Worldwide. I'm only here to be a moderator. The real superstars here are on the panel. In no particular order, we'll start off with Christi Cornette, is the Chief Culture Officer and Cincinnati Bell. We have LaQuenta Jacobs, Chief Diversity Officer at XPO Logistics. We have Karen Height, who's a Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at E.W. Scribbs Company. And we have Audra Jenkins, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Randstad North America. So first to start off with, may I ask each of you to take a moment to introduce yourselves? So Christi, let's start with you.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. I am Chief Culture Officer for Cincinnati Bell, and when most of you think about Cincinnati Bell, you think that it's only Cincinnati. We are actually a global organization with over 4,500 employees. I have responsibility for corporate marketing, HR, communications, and public relations. So a very diverse category of responsibilities. Thank you.
Awesome. LaQuenta.
Hello, everyone. I am LaQuenta Jacobs, Chief Diversity Officer for XPO Logistics. And like Christi, I am very excited to be here today and engage in the discussion. For those of you unfamiliar with XPO Logistics, we are a global provider in transportation and logistics services with over 100,000 employees, both here in the U.S. and globally. Thank you.
Audra.
Well, good afternoon, Shawne. It's an honor to be here today, as always. I'm the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Randstad North America. And for those of you unfamiliar with us, Randstad is the #1 human capital firm in the world. We put to work every day 38,000 associates and over 750,000 talent. Happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, Audra. Karen, I think we have you now.
You think I'm on now?
You are on.
Okay, great. Hi. I'm the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at the E.W. Scribbs Company. I've been with the company for 9 years. My role is overseeing the talent acquisition for Scribbs. We have about close to 6,000 employees. We own and operate 61 TV stations locally within the U.S. And we also have a network news division. We are owners of the Scribbs Spelling Bee, and we have an investigative bureau in Washington, D.C. In addition to my recruiting efforts, also led the efforts for our employer brand and responsible for rolling out and being sure I'm overseeing things related to our EDI efforts for recruiting.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So our dynamic team has spoken to many leaders to take part in this webinar. And just by coincidence, all of you happen to be women leaders at your respective companies. You must likely face additional challenges in getting to your current roles. LaQuenta, you want to give us a little background on the challenges that you faced in terms of championing diversity?
So I will definitely start out by saying within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, it is important to have the support of your leadership within your organization. I am in a very fortunate situation where our CEO and our president are outward and dynamic champions for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which gives us headwinds, right, when we're looking at programs and implementing our programs and creating employee engagement initiatives. When we think about talent when we think about the talent and acquisition space, one of the challenges we have is pipelining with the demand for talent and the war for talent. And I think that is something that we all can share on this call that we're faced with. And so it is creating a very engaging and welcoming organization through our branding and our communication that helps us win that war for talent and helps us be very strategic in that war for talent.
Great, thank you so much. Christi, you've been with Cincinnati Bell for almost 20 years. What strategies have you found successful in bringing more diversity over those last 2 decades?
First of all, you're dating me, but that's okay. Yes, I have been with Cincinnati Bell for over 20 years. I actually spent most of my career at Cincinnati Bell in marketing. So I actually ran the marketing organization. And what I quickly realized is there was no diverse strategy for marketing. So our talent did not include people of color or women. And so what we found is that we were marketing to just one segment of the population. So kind of my opportunity while I was in marketing was to bring a diverse population to our external marketing, as well as working with advertising and marketing agencies that had a diverse population. As I moved into, so about 3.5 years ago, I took the role of Chief Culture Officer for Cincinnati Bell. We had made 2 fairly large acquisitions, and it was, how do you change a 140-year-old telephone company to a company that was relevant and diverse? And if you look at the IT industry on the whole, it's basically a white male dominant market. And so we had an opportunity to make an impact and change things. So one of the things that I did is you have to be intentional. Diversity is not just you check a box. Diversity means educating leaders in the company, and it is a huge cultural change, and it doesn't happen overnight. So the first thing we had to do was create a resource pool. So when a job opening came up, we had a really good diverse resource pool for our management team to choose from. So that made an immediate impact. And the way we did that is by establishing partnerships not only with local colleges and our local community, but going after best of breed, University of Michigan, Harvard. And so we created this very comprehensive resource pool for opportunities from entry-level positions all the way up through manager and director positions. And it's made a huge impact. We're not nearly where we need to be, but we have a plan on how to get there.
Excellent. Audra, you want to give us a little background on what Randstad's doing?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Shawne. So first and foremost, I want to say that I'm the first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for a major staffing firm. So I think that really set the tone of making sure that what we build would be sustainable, but also scalable for years to come. So we started out with our Executive Diversity Council, making sure that every executive in our business was tied to diversity and inclusion. It helps drive accountability. Our Executive Diversity Council is actually chaired by our CEO. So we're looking at metrics on a quarterly basis by each business owner. So I think that brings accountability and visibility. I think the second piece of it is looking at how tying diversity to business goals and effort. So my first strategic plan was creating the strategic pillars for our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office, which are workplace, marketplace, and business. So workplace is focused on our internal diversity, all our efforts around our business resource groups, our ambassadors and champions, our trainings on conscious inclusion, all of those things, and allyship and sponsorship programs. And then marketplace is how we go out and brand ourselves, to our previous comments about branding. It's important because we want to be recognized as a diverse and inclusive, not only employer of choice, but a partner of choice. And that's really critical for us. And then business is how we tie diversity and inclusion into everything that we do. So we've got several programs that we do. That's Higher Hope, which is our program to get women that have been victims of trafficking, abuse, back to work. And also our social justice initiative, Transcend, which is helping to reskill diverse and untapped talent. So those are the ways that we tie diversity in from a business perspective. And I think that makes it successful when we're tying it to our business goals.
Awesome, thank you. And Karen, give us a little background on your organization.
Yeah, sure. And I'll be coming from the talent acquisition perspective. From strategies that I found successful in bringing more diversity really have been in building partnerships and allies in diversity, and finding key leaders within the organization to help champion those efforts. Externally, we've also worked a lot with HBCUs that have strong journalism programs, since we're a journalism company, and as well as diversity organizations such as the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, National Association of Black Journalists. So the key is that you're where the candidates are. And so some of the things that when I think about the challenges of recruiting, recruiting from those pipelines is really important, and also understanding that it's important to increase diversity. You have to have the whole company embrace it. And so our leadership has, and we have in, equity and diversity leader, we have 4 pillars that are very, very essential in our organization that we abide by, and focus on developing, and it's race and ethnicity, we have gender, we have veterans, and LGBTQIA. Those are our 4 pillars. So we focus on developing in those particular areas, and everyone within the company really understands what that means. And then the other thing that I think is really important as it relates to that is not just the recruiting team, but it's more than just hiring, which is what we do. It's about developing and retaining so that as people walk through the door, that there is an environment. It fosters an environment of inclusivity.
Thank you so much. So, while there's increased focus on diversity hiring, there's still plenty of work to do, clearly. A recent Monster study found that 1 in 3 employers globally said they do not have a diversity inclusion strategy in place. So how do you communicate the importance of diversity hiring in a very non-diverse company or industry? LaQuenta, you want to kick us off here?
Absolutely. When embarking on a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, I think it's important that you understand your industry and you build a roadmap, right? You have to understand your organization, your industry, and build a roadmap. As you mentioned, I'm in an industry, trucking, for example, that provides its own set of unique challenges, like many other organizations when we look at our traditional measures for finding talent. Very much like some of my colleagues on the call have stated, I'm in an environment or in an industry that is known as predominantly a white male environment. So for us, it is looking at adjacent industries like supply chain, logistics, retail, and technology for us to source our talent. Our voice at XPO started with an internal review and focus on our brand. We had to ask ourselves, what makes us more competitive, or why would a candidate want to join us over our competitors? We had those real conversations, and we created our brand around those real conversations relative to our company culture, what we bring to the table, and what we offer our candidates. We also created an external site for job seekers to learn about our company culture through our Belong at XPO site. And we also have our internal TA teams that understand the message, and it's embedded in all of our collateral. And so one of the things that our TA team will do when engaging a hiring manager is that they have the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation during the partnership for filling a position. That is one of the very first conversations that we have. When I think about the average job seeker, regardless of their level, they're looking to join an organization that has a strong brand and a sense of employee engagement. It's not just about a job. Most job seekers are looking at a place where they can create a career for themselves. And so DE&I, as Christi mentioned, is not a check the box exercise, if I can quote you correctly. It's not a nice to have either. It is a business imperative. And if a company wants to be, competitive in the market, they have to have that business imperative and have to have that as part of their strategy. So it's not really just about changing the numbers or changing representation, but it's about accepting thought from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective. It's about creating cultural acceptance. And many organizations start off by charting the course on changing their representation, but they don't really think about how they're going to embrace the talent once they bring it into the organization. And I think that is absolutely critical when you are developing a strategy or adding momentum to your strategy, especially in an industry or in an area that doesn't necessarily breed diversity.
All right, so we know from looking at folks who've registered for this webinar that they represent organizations that are in different stages, if I can call it this, on that diversity hiring maturity curve. And with this overall topic, it can be very easy for some to wonder what's in it for me, right? And I think some of you started to touch on this. So is it just for doing good or for the sake of actually doing good, right? So looking at the moral piece versus, kind of what's good business. And there's research that addresses this, right? Market Watch recently found that the first companies attain 19% higher revenue than homogenous companies with account on account of greater innovation. So I think that's a great lead into where have you guys seen, I think, so let me touch on this, the numbers play into the actual business case, right? So moving it from this is morally good, if you will, to what's in it for the business, or what's in it for me if I'm making a decision for the, on behalf of the business.
Well, I will say that morally it is good. It's the absolute right thing to do. But I think part of the education is the impact that diversity makes on the organization. You get diversity of thought, creativity, a different perspective. And different perspectives are always good for business. So the effect on the bottom line has shown to be impacted by having a diverse organization. And we see that too. I mean, if I look at my marketing, background and what we did in terms of bringing a diverse pool of actors to reach out to a certain demographic, our numbers went way up. We were missing a whole segment of the population. So diversity is morally right, but from a business perspective, and I think this is where the education comes in with leadership and management, that it can have a significant impact on the bottom line.
All right, great. Audra, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any words here?
I think really, truly, when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion, the biggest obstacle, I think, especially for diversity practitioners, is not having that business acumen. You have to really come at it, understand, as LaQuenta said earlier, understand your business, understand what the needs are, and speak to how diversity, equity, inclusion can address some of those needs in your organization. Whether if you have a retention problem of talent, if you have an attraction problem of talent. I mean, there are so many things that you can link into that ebbs and flows with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But at the end of the day, any company that's trying to be an employer of choice, I'll just use that term, I know we overuse that, they've got to make sure that they have a place that people want to come, they feel like they're valued, welcomed, and respected, and they will want to stay. But if you have a, open door, front door, back door, where they're just passing through, you're never going to achieve your goals and never going to move the needle in this space. So it's really critical to make sure that you're feeling the business gap and needs and finding ways where diversity, equity, inclusion can do that. Whether it's corporate social responsibility, very similar to our Higher Hope program, we were able to bring in a lot of diverse and untapped talent through our Higher Hope program and place them internally within Randstad and externally with our clients. So just finding ways that impacts your business where you can drive diversity, equity, inclusion in a meaningful way, I think that's really where practitioners need to focus in on.
Let's bring the discussion back to obstacles, right? So clearly all of you have worked hard to overcome the obstacles in your own careers. And clearly there's also still work to be done at the organizational level. Audra, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle to embracing diversity?
That's a great question, Shawne. Thank you for that. I want to say the top three, and just in my perspective and experience, has been first bias. When you think about not only just unconscious bias, but consciously exclusive, I think you see where we've got these glass ceilings for women. We've got these cultural fit conversations for people of color. There's a lot of bias especially in the recruitment process. So it's really important that we address those bias issues and find the root cause. And I'm not saying that, one demographic has bias over another. Every one of us have bias. I mean, it's the backpack full of stuff we carry that we've learned over from childhood to adulthood that makes us who we are today. So I think it's just recognizing it and then finding ways to mitigate it in your recruitment and talent acquisition process. For us at Randstad, we use a lot of technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, recruiter bots, things to make sure that we're looking at the skill set and not just the name, not just the nationality, not just the demographic group, but looking truly to find the best talent possible, not only for ourselves, but for our clients. The second thing I would say that's a major obstacle is pay inequality. Especially as a woman and a woman of color, this is something I faced in my career. A lot of people want to believe in this meritocracy myth that if you just work hard, you could be working 80 hours a week and never move ahead. You can be working 100 hours a week. That's not what's going to get you ahead. It's making sure that you're recognized for the work you're in, value add to your organization, and senior leaders are calling you out on that. So you need sponsorship, and you need also, people that are advocating for you on your behalf at all times. So I think that's the second thing. So making sure that if you are paying people fairly and equitably for the skills that they bring, and not just because, John is a male and Jane is a female. I mean, we need to make sure that you're paying equal value for equal work. And then the third thing I will say is definitely microaggressions. Microaggressions, I know it's been described as dying a million times a day with 1,000 cuts, that we get. It's those little well-intentioned comments that are, seems like a compliment, but really it's a backhanded insult and very discriminatory and also offensive. So I think that those microaggressions, Catalyst came out of a term that says that it's creating this emotional tax phenomenon. It's the price that especially people of color pay every day for working in corporate America. So I was just thinking about how do we address those issues, because the long-lasting effects of that are mental health problems, physical health problems, lack of feeling of that you belong, in the spaces that you occupy. So I think those are the top 3 obstacles I think that are derailing diversity and equity and inclusion efforts in organizations today.
Great, thank you. All right. So changing again here, we've heard that the internal diversity questions are very relevant to topics for attendees, right? So LaQuenta, someone said that they find recruiters or leaders that they don't address or talk about diversity because they don't know what to say, right? Have concerns about saying the wrong thing, or simply worry that they are not articulating things in a way that is legally advisable. This is especially pressing considering Monster found that 45% of candidates expect to learn about a company's D&I efforts during the interview process. So, long-winded way to lead in, how do you help address these internal concerns and provide guidance?
That's an excellent question. And I would start off by saying you can't do it alone. You have to have partnerships across your organization, with whether it's your talent acquisition team, your learning and development team, your leadership team. You have to have those partnerships. For us at XPO and within our talent acquisition team, we have an excellent partnership between our talent acquisition leader and diversity, equity, inclusion. And we meet regularly to talk about the challenges that we're facing, whether it's from pipelining, creating a resource pool, conversations, feedback that we've gotten from our candidates. And we're continuously looking internally at our processes to ensure our processes don't have bias that Audra mentioned. You can have intrinsic bias built into your processes unknowingly, right? And so we have to look at that and make sure that we are not creating that experience for our candidates. Even though we have multiple businesses with very different challenges at XPO, we've created a competitive diversity recruiting framework that's focused around our affirmative action plans, our aspirational goals, our benchmarking, our individual business goals, as well as our group needs, right? Because we have different representation across our organization, and there's different levers that we have to pull across our organization. So it's not a one-size-fits-all diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. We have a framework, we have a very clear statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when it comes to implementing the processes and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the business, that's very unique and is solutions driven based off of the needs of our internal businesses. I think many make the mistake of thinking that diversity is a problem to solve. For example, if we could simply hire more women, we solve the problem, right? We need to change that internal view and understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a continuum. For example, once you've hired that woman, how are you embracing her? How are your programs and your benefits supporting her? How are you creating an environment, like Christi said, that she wants to come to every day and that she feels valued and belongs within your organization? So you have to continue to look at those particular benefits as well. And when you have that culture, it comes through in your company representatives, whether it's the hiring manager, your talent acquisition representative, it comes through in that conversation, and your candidates experience it through those that they talk to. The last thing I would say, as I'm thinking through kind of my thoughts, is it's also important that an organization has a well-documented and articulated diversity and equity statement that's visible, that job seekers can go out and find on their own. They don't have to have somebody within the company tell them about it. It's visible on your collateral, it's in your marketing, it's in your brands, right? And you partner with organizations to help you build that.
Great, thank you so much. Anyone else want to add to this?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to add, Shawne, that's a very good point, but you have to create a safe place in your company for employees to have conversations. And the way we've done that is through our employee resource groups. So we have, an African American resource group. We have an LGBTQ. We have a woman's ERG. And you know what? That has changed the game in our organization, because what typically happens is you have advocates that join these ERGs that don't necessarily identify with that ERG, but they're advocates. And so what we've started to do is to create these conversations, this safe place where employees can talk about their concerns and their feelings. And the ERGs, the employee resource groups, have played a major part in that.
All right, perfect. Anyone else?
Yeah, Shawne, I want to piggyback on what Christi just shared about the her employee resource groups. We have business resource groups, BRGs. But I also want to talk about more so around the climate. If you ask this question in 2019, I think you get a different answer than you would in 2021. We have to really be mindful of the time that we're in. We're living in this triple pandemic. We've got COVID-19 on one, it's like a three-legged stool, COVID-19 on one leg. We've got social justice, unrest on another one, and then this very divisive political climate that we're operating in the United States. So it's like there's a whole, like a perfect trifecta storm of what's happening. And I feel as though we've got to look at the shift that's happened, from 2020 to 2021. Right now, companies need to recognize, Christi, I think Christi and LaQuenta said this earlier, that it is a business imperative to have a very strong and robust culture, but you have got to answer not only the employees who are serving next to your customers, but the people that are keeping your business going, moving forward. How do you answer to them about what are your positions on social justice? What are your positions on an inclusion? What are we doing? They want to see action. They don't want to just see words. Everybody came out with a statement following the George Floyd killing, but I really think that the difference is seeing what those companies follow through on. Are they really standing by those statements that they made? And is there a shift of culture, a shift of belonging, a shift of inclusion in their organization as a result of that? So I think those are the things that, in addition to what Christi said about bringing safe spaces, but people, your employees, want to see what actionable steps are you making, not just the words that you're saying.
Well, I think it serves as a great transition point as we look at, making some interesting observations. We receive culture and fit, so very apropos, right? And they get thrown around a lot when discussing potential new hires or employees that might be up for promotions. However, we're not defining exactly what those terms mean, and we're not forcing our colleagues to do the same. So when you're already starting at a less than diverse company, you can end up promoting and hiring people that look or act exactly the same. I think we're just touching on this because they're a good cultural fit. So, Christi, you are the Chief Culture Officer. What are your thoughts on this view?
Well, for me, changing this culture has been probably one of my biggest challenges in the position. And I will tell you, again, think about this, 140-year-old telephone company, and a tech company, which has very few women, very few people of color. So culturally, it's all about education. And that's the way you change it. You have to have cultural conversation. So as an example, we have a strategic plan for DEI and culture. And we are in the process, it has not happened yet. The strategic plan is now done. There are 5 pillars, but everyone has to sign off on it. And you're measured on that. So your bonus, your performance is measured on, how willing you are to accept this cultural change in the organization. That is huge. I mean, we've never done that before. And so we're pretty excited that we've built an education plan, we've opened up safe spaces, and now we have a strategic plan that every leader in the company has to sign off on and will be measured on. That's the only way you change it. You have to be intentional. Intentional makes all the difference in the world. So for us, what this allows us to do is be very intentional and to be able to measure it. And again, it does not happen overnight. We have to be keenly aware that this is a journey. So that's what we're doing in our organization. But again, having everybody sign off on it, measure it, and make sure that people are held accountable to it.
Thank you.
And that feels a little preachy, but unless you're measuring it and holding folks accountable and it's hitting their paychecks and their bonuses, it's not going to change.
If it does sound preachy, it happens to be true as well. So we'll keep going. All right, Audra, what's Randstad doing around developing these values in order to avoid the pitfalls of, shall we say, cultural fit?
I think first and foremost, I'll give an example. One of the things when we first started this journey, I mean, we've been on this journey for some while now, and I think that we had to get hiring managers out of this mindset that you have to have we can only hire people with staffing experience. There's, very similar complementary skill sets in adjacent industries. And I think that is really what changed this idea of this cultural fit by looking at people that may not come from similar organizations or cultures as Randstad. So I think that's one way. I think the second thing is looking at making sure that there's not an indifference around D&I. There's a lot of people who say the right things around D&I, but it really does matter when I keep coming back to actions, because actions speak louder than words. And I really, truly believe that. Mm-hmm. So I really think there's making sure that everyone understands, what is our CEO's vision and mission around diversity, equity, inclusion, and how can we all support that? I love what Christi said about signing off on it, and it's everyone's responsibility. A lot of companies fail with their D&I efforts because they'll hire the one DEI leader, and then that one D&I leader will be shouldering the responsibility all by themselves. But culture is everyone. It's not just the leaders, it's the staff, it's your talent, it's everybody in your ecosystem and your organization makes up your culture. And how well we treat those people within the organization impacts that culture. So I think it's just getting to that point of, yes, it's great to talk about diversity, it's great to talk about inclusion, but if we get to the ultimate place of belonging, which is where we want to be, then where everyone can come into your organization and say, hey, I belong here, then you've got a culture that's sustainable and long-lasting and scalable, for our organization.
Okay, thank you. Karen or LaQuenta, do you have anything you want to add?
What I was going to say to that question is, as Christi mentioned and as Audra mentioned, the employee experience is extremely important, but also you've got to have an education strategy and a strategic plan for your leaders to follow. Within our organization, our values, two of our 5 values are respect and inclusion. And those are the table stakes to the game. When you're looking at an opportunity to join XPO, our vision and our mission and our goals are kind of out there, right? If you're not respectful or if you're not inclusive, this isn't going to be the culture for you. And so we've moved away from cultural fit conversations to having engagement conversations with our leaders. When there is an intake discussion around the talent, we're also talking to the leader about what the current skill sets are of the teams they have. And if they could hire for a gap in their team, what would they hire for? So we start to move away from these narrow focused job descriptions to let's hire for what your organization needs for the future and what you need to accomplish your goals. That has also increased the pipeline for us and the ability to attract talent from those adjacent markets, as Audra said, that have allowed us to increase our talent pool. Again, like Christi mentioned, we're making strides. We're nowhere perfect where we need to be, but we're having the conversations, we're educating our leaders, and our leaders are also bought into the process. The last thing that I will mention, just as an idea for those on the call, is we've created a values goal within our organization that ties diversity, equity, and inclusion to every people leader in our organization. It is part of their performance review. They will be evaluated on that on an annual basis. And then on top of that, our executives have it tied to their executive compensation. And so like Audra, we review our metrics on a quarterly basis. And no one wants to sit in that room, right, and have their peers look at their information and they don't have a focus on it. And so that leadership commitment is there, which trickles down into the organization.
All right, so we're going to keep going here. A question from an attendee. When an organization is starting with very little diversity in the senior executive roles, how do you create an interview experience for the diverse talent that sends the message around how important it is to build a diverse workforce in the organization? This one will go with Christi to start off with.
Okay, so are you asking how do you move folks into that role? Is that the essence of the question?
Well, I think what this person's asking is really how are you creating an interview experience that taps into a diverse talent pool,
okay.
Right? So because that part of it is the pipeline, right? So bringing them in is early, obviously the early part of the pipeline. So how are we starting there? And obviously we touched on some of the points along the way.
Yeah. So it starts with the pipeline, right? And so, I think the interview process is you've got to prepare. And in our organization, we have very few minorities at senior level. So, and we've been very, again, I use the word intentional as we bring people in for those higher level positions or promote people from within to those higher level positions, that they're well prepared and understand what the conversation needs to be. So as an example, we recently brought in an executive outside that was interviewing for a position, and we knew that candidate was probably the right person for the job, but had to interview with numerous executives to get the position. And so I think it's about preparing that person for the interview process. Now, it's also up to the individual as well to be educated. There's nothing worse than having someone come in, diverse candidate or not, and not understanding the essence of the organization. So I think it's the responsibility for the person that's interviewing, but it's also our responsibility if it's someone that we really want, especially if it's a diverse candidate, to help them prepare for that interview process, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Okay.
Others want to join in?
I would definitely say intentionality is extremely important. Here at Scripps, we create a structured interview process. It didn't used to be like that, but once I came on board, it was more about really helping everyone to understand the importance of having structure so that people aren't just hiring people that are like them and people that they are comfortable with. And so we provide an interview guide, and that interview guide has questions about the competencies. And those competencies are for each interviewer. They have different things that they focus on. There is a rubric that follows that. So you're evaluating each candidate on the competencies for the job. And after that is completed, there's also things like education that we look at, the training that they had, the years of experience. And this process creates an equal playing field for all candidates and the ability to assess them individually. And we're putting this process in place. You really have to have buy-in from leadership, and that's senior leadership, and then it goes down. And some organizations are ready for it and some are not, because you are held accountable to that. Once the rubric and everything is complete, we look at that to make sure that we have the right candidate and it measures against the competencies, and not just because someone was really nice or I feel like I can work well with them. Some other things that, if you talk about when you're bringing people in, it's, sharing those things around your strategy, your EDI strategy. And what people are looking for is to make sure that they see themselves in your culture and that they're also going to be able to grow within your culture. So I think those things are really important when you're bringing individuals into the organization also.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to dig a
Shawne,
Shawne,
one of the things that I was going to mention is, I really do challenge us from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. While representation is important, when you're bringing a candidate in for an interview, there may not be an opportunity for that person to meet with someone who's diverse because the hiring manager may not be diverse. The area that they're going into may not be diverse. But it is about understanding and ensuring your leaders understand that diversity is not just about representation, but it's a diversity of thought, and it's their ability to talk about and discuss inclusion within their organization. And that is something that we focused on at XPO. We have inclusive leadership training where we focus our leaders on being inclusive leaders, what it looks like, right? And there's a couple of components that we've talked about. It's not hiring for a resume, but it's hiring for a candidate that you need inside your organization. It's about creating opportunity through development of your employees. An ally can speak to that regardless of their racial makeup. And so they can speak to that in a way that a candidate is attracted to that in an organization. It's about having the conversation with a candidate that says, we have development programs for frontline leaders, or RISE, our two monikers that we have with our organization around executive leadership. That's an investment in them. So it's speaking to the triggers are the things that are important to that candidate, regardless of if that person represents in the same racial or gender class as that person. It is really ensuring that your organization's culture is an inclusive culture, and making sure that talent acquisition is prepared to have those conversations with leaders around what those levers are from a candidate experience perspective.
One thing that I wanted to add, Shawne, is interns are a really important channel for us. So, and you can get very, intentional with interns, but bringing interns in, whether they're college students, post-grad students, or folks that have entered into a program where we have community partnerships. And then as you bring those folks along, we can't lose the importance of what mentorship means for diverse folks. So assigning mentors to those interns, that gives you a perfect channel for hiring. Now, you're probably not going to bring those folks in at high levels, but certainly, we're a technology company, and bringing them into technical roles, which we see very few diverse folks in that field. So don't lose the importance of bringing interns in, providing mentorship, which helps with the entire education process as they interview for positions.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so digging deeper into diversity recruiting, LaQuenta, some companies have narrow qualifications that have successfully worked in creating a pipeline of talent. Sometimes those narrow qualifications, like holding a 4-year college degree, can actually be limiting the pool. How have you been successful in finding and hiring great candidates with diverse backgrounds that might not have the mandated qualifications?
And this is a perfect example of where bias may be unknowingly built into your job description or hiring process. For example, a very narrow job description about, let's say, a general manager role is typically written by a hiring manager who's used the previous candidate's experiences or successes to identify what success looks like in that role, instead of having an engagement discussion with HR or talent acquisition around what's required for the position. Diversity, as I mentioned before, our DE&I conversation is an important intake conversation between our hiring manager and our talent acquisition professionals. And so I recommend that organizations continue to look at their job descriptions about every 24 months or 2 years. There's new technology that's rolled out, new changes in the role that's rolled out. And so you need to revise your job descriptions to meet the needs of the job. Another excellent way to remove bias from your process is to partner with an augmented writing organization like Texio, where they can look at your job descriptions or your job postings and let you know and identify for you where there's maybe bias built into your processes that are eliminating women or people of color because of your candidacy or your job descriptions. At XPO, we have been very strategic and de-emphasize 4-year degree qualifications across many of our job descriptions and emphasize more related experience, where we've opened the door for military experience. We've opened the door for veterans experience in lieu of a degree. Additionally, I would say, look for strategy for broadening your pipeline. Christi, I'm not saying it exactly how you said it before, but it is really about having a pipeline roadmap. If you continue, I'll use the old saying, if you continue to fish from the same pond, you're going to catch the same fish. So if you're not getting the talent that you need, look at ways to broaden that approach, right? And I recommend looking at adjacent skills and markets to broaden your skill set, looking at partnerships, as Christi mentioned, internships, graduate programs, HBCUs, Hispanic colleges and universities, organizations where you find talent, getting your brand out there. All of that is important. The last thing I would say is sometimes when you are lifting the culture, it requires a re-education of your leaders. And so you may have to spend some time re-educating your leaders around what important skills are needed so that they can also start to lift and shift their mind about looking at talent differently versus hiring those that they're comfortable with or are very familiar with.
Excellent. All right. So what are your tips for talking to hiring managers when it's down to a few candidates who represent different aspects of diversity, and some may already be well represented in your companies and others less so? Karen, you want to take this one?
Sure. So we look at the skill set each person brings to the table, and we would hire the most qualified person. That being said, if you have a diverse candidate as a finalist, and all things are equal, the company has a goal, and that goal is to increase diversity, then we would have a conversation with that hiring manager, and our recommendation would be to remind them that our company's diversity goals and encourage them to move in that direction. It's just not about ensuring diverse candidates get in the door. It's about ensuring that once they're there, they have the ability to learn and grow and to have visibility to senior leaders. Investing in professional development is extremely important, particularly to diverse candidates. They want to know how they can grow, and it's important that you invest in them. The other thing I would say, just to piggyback on LaQuenta, is about going where the talent is to extend your reach. I think that is so important. One of the things that we do is in reference to diverse conferences. We attend all the journalism conferences from a diversity perspective. We are on social media and all the social sites that are pertaining to, if you're looking for on-air talent in particular, which is something that we look for constantly for talent on air for the TV stations, we're going where they are. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're tweeting. I have all the recruiters with KPIs against social as well. And so we also go to HBCUs, as I mentioned earlier. We have great partnerships with Hampton and some other schools out there. It's important that you extend your reach and your brand as you're going through the process. And so the thing that I would say about it is this isn't a sprint. It's definitely a marathon. And you have to have some goals. And those goals you have to, year over year, really validate assess where you are and determine where you're going from there. And we do that. We measure things every single year to make sure that if we haven't met those goals, why haven't we? What other directions can we go? And that's something that's really intrinsic in our culture.
I'd like to add on to what Karen said. I think she brings up an important point: the best candidate. Diversity for diversity will not work. So if my diversity program says, yes, I got a diverse person that I hired, check. If they're not the best candidate, your program will fail. And so that's what we have to be very, very careful of, is that we're creating this resource pool of this channel of good candidates. And that's a very important aspect of diversity, because that's when you see it fail, when they're bringing in diverse candidates that are not qualified for the jobs or don't have the ability to get there. So we have to really be mindful for that as we look at our success factors.
Excellent.
And I agree. And we look at everything and make sure it's equal. Everything equal, and you're looking to increase in diversity, move towards the diverse person.
That's right.
Yeah.
We have received over 60 questions since we started this webinar. Obviously, we will not have an opportunity to address all of them. We'll try to answer as many as possible offline as well. But I'm trying to group them into ones that will touch as many similarities as possible. A lot of them were actually around ERGs. Two that I thought were really important. One of them was around getting started. And how do you start that process? Do you nominate someone? Does someone volunteer? How do you encourage people to join? So the first is founding those groups. And then the second is there are some concerns that perhaps they create isolation and silos. So not only how do you get them started, but how do you make them inclusive within your company?
So I will speak to our ERG process. Anyone can form an ERG if they have a charter that's approved by the executive team, and if they have at least 10 members. So charter, 10 members, it then goes through the approval process. And we've had some issues with them trying to govern, because that's what happens. And so you really have to stay close to your ERG. So each of our ERGs has an executive sponsor. And to be an executive sponsor, you have to be a VP or above. So that stops a lot of it, because typically the executive sponsor has a close relationship with the ERG governing body. And so it stops a lot of that. And so that's why we put that in place, because we started to get some issues around that. But once we put executive sponsors in place that could help them navigate through issues, it's worked out much better. But again, they have to have a charter, 10 members, and it has to be approved by an executive board.
Yeah, I can piggyback on what Christi just said. Thank you for that, Christi. I also want to add that our business resource groups require a business plan. So myself, our CHRO, and the executive sponsor reviews those business plans to make sure that it's tied to the overarching business goals of our company. So we want to make sure that while it's employee-led, it's also conducive to achieving our Executive Diversity Council goals as well.
And I would add, it's important that your ERG has an ally component to it, and it's, as Christi and Audra mentioned, that it's open to anyone who wants to join. As an ally, I may have a child with a disability. While my child may not work at my organization, I have a infinite, calling to be part of that ERG, to create an atmosphere or an environment for someone with a disability in my organization. So having those allyships is also important to breaking down the walls and those barriers that may come, or be perceived.
That's great. Perfect. Our next question is, our company is making progress, but not there yet. I think a lot of people can say that on this call and outside of this call as well. How transparent should we be about our own diversity efforts? I think a lot of this, as we're seeing companies out there and promoting on their own About Us page and their website, how many people that they have in their executive suite or directors and above. What if you're not quite there yet, but you have a plan and you're on your way?
It's about understanding kind of what your message is and where you are, and having a very clear, articulated message around diversity. You've got to know where you are first before you can go out and start spouting numbers or communicating metrics. Many organizations made a statement, but it's the action behind those statements that really are proof points. You can talk in numbers, but I could have a very diverse executive team that has no inclusion in it. And that speaks to my company culture. So it's really about, what are your proof points? What are you doing in your organization to create a sense of belonging, in my opinion? And that is where the conversation needs to occur. An organization has to be comfortable with what their metrics are and what their aspirational goals are before they start to communicate those. And so we also have to understand, I think Christi mentioned it earlier, it's a journey. Someone else said it's a marathon. Someone else said it's a continuum. It is a process that evolves over time. And as organizations become more mature, you will see that evolution in what they communicate and their brand.
I also think that if you want to have diversity, you have to be transparent. You should be it in your employer brand. You should extend it, telling stories and videos on your website, through social media, and utilize your employees as ambassadors. They should be like your number one ally. And, future employees want to see themselves in your organization if they're going to be part of it. So I think it's really important that you share it.
And just to kind of piggyback on all this wonderful insights, I would just want to say that I think it's important to be authentic and set realistic goals, because you can set yourself up for failure for these large aspirational goals when your culture is not ready for it. So cultural readiness is really critical when you're deciding what you want to share and what level of transparency, but I think also just making sure it's realistic for where you are today.
Just in general, how do you hold leadership and hiring managers accountable to make sure there are diverse hires? I think this actually goes back a lot to our earlier conversation, where it's beyond checking a box and you're hiring for the person that's the right person for the role and not because the diverse hire. So how do you have those difficult conversations, making sure there's accountability, but also, not hiring for the sake of hiring?
I think it has to be a metric tied to performance. It just has to be. It has to be a part of performance plan. Everybody has to be invested in it. Now, again, I think it's up to all of us to make sure that we're bringing best of breed candidates to those open job positions. But again, people have to be accountable. And the only way folks are accountable is if it's tied to the performance plan, which is tied to bonus or pay.
And just to add to what Christi just shared, I think it also has to be visible. I mentioned earlier what our Executive Diversity Council, and I think LaQuenta said the same, we're looking at our business owners' numbers every quarter in front of the CEO. And that's a very daunting thing to be in if you're not making progress and if you're in the red and not progressing towards green. So I think that visibility, leads to greater accountability.
Great, thank you. Shawne, I'm going to do one quick monster webinar plug before I hand it back off to you. This has been a wonderful conversation today. Thank you all to our panelists for joining and for our attendees for making time. We all know that you are juggling quite a bit, so we really appreciate you joining us live today. And if you had a job, just a reminder that we'll be sending the webinar recording out tomorrow. Please feel free to rewatch it, reach out to us, connect on LinkedIn, and please continue sending questions our way. We love to continue the conversation. This is not just a drumbeat. This is not just one conversation that we want to have at one time. This is a continuum. We have more great content coming up. In March, we will be doing a focus on recovering from the C-section. As many of you know, women unfortunately have taken a step back in their careers, primarily due to COVID-19. So we're going to be taking a look at where women currently stand and what employers can do to re-encourage women back to the workforce and most importantly, retain them there. We'll also be doing another deep dive on diversity, this time focusing on employer brand. It was something that was brought up multiple times during this conversation, and tips that you can do in terms of having more unbiased recruitment job descriptions, as well as how you can create a more inclusive work environment. So thank you again. Shawne, back to you.
We're out of time. We easily could have gone another 30, 60 minutes, but we're going to stop here. Thank you all for making time. Thank you to the panel for amazing input. And as stated, we'll follow up with the questions afterwards. Thank you all. Have a great day.